Okay, greetings and welcome to all of you who are interested in SkyDancer. We have, I don't want to say just completed the underworld because Venus is still in the underworld, but we are coming to our completion phase with Venus and her underworld journey. And I spent most of the journey in the underworld myself, as the people who joined underworld can tell you. And so I am just adjusting and making sure that I have a nice little heating pad on my back, as that was what was effective for me when I was in the underworld. And there will be many, many stories for me to tell about all that I learned and discovered. There's always so many treasures for us in the underworld. But today, what I really wanted to talk about was Venus as an evening star, and especially for those of you who may have just experienced an underworld initiation yourself and who feel as though you are women who track Venus in your own lives. Venus is right now, she is in what we call a Leo overtone cycle. So her cycle began in last year in 2023 in August, and she had her retrograde conjunction with the sun at that time. And then she began her morning star phase, which is the descent phase. And in her descent phase, there is this kind of descent into our humanity, right? That's what Venus is doing. As morning star, we see Venus as having the energy of Venus of immanence. It's Taurian, so it's related to this incarnation and to our soma, right? And then she goes, very, very far. She travels on her descent phase around to the other side of the sun. And once she is kind of like hidden or occulted by the rays of the sun, she dips below the horizon. And to the ancients, this meant that a planet or a god was in the underworld. And so she dipped below the horizon back at the end of April, which is actually when my own underworld experience or initiation, tracking it back, actually began. And so when she is on the far side of the sun, she's having what we call her superior conjunction. So she has another conjunction to the sun, right, on the far side, only we can't see it. In this time, that conjunction happened in the sign of Gemini. And Gemini is such an important sign. Gemini is a sign that is, from an exoteric perspective, and exoteric means like the outer mysteries or like the mundane or collective level, is a sign that is ruled by Mercury. And from an esoteric perspective, as we'll see in a minute, Venus is ruled by, Gemini is ruled by Venus on the esoteric perspective. Now, when we have this kind of second conjunction to Venus, we call this the undertone. So her overtone is Leo, meaning Leo rules the entire cycle because that was the sign Venus was in when she began the cycle. But this second conjunction kind of adds another harmonic, or it adds another kind of energetic to the cycle, right? And so it's like now we're going to layer in on top of that Leo energy, the energy of Gemini. Gemini, ruled by Mercury, is an air sign. And Leo was kind of like, there was this transition because the cycle before Leo was Capricorn, right? And Capricorn was ruled by the static feminine. It's an earth sign. And earth signs tend to be more stable and preserving, right? Like they have that energy of the sustainer or the preserver. They tend to be more dense. They tend to be more solid, more crystallized energetically. And so we moved from that Capricorn cycle, which was before the Leo cycle, into the Leo cycle. And Leo, as a sign ruled by the sun and the element of fire, was much more dynamic. And so we've been working with the energies of the dynamic feminine. And so now we're adding in this extra energy of Gemini, which is an air sign, and which is also dynamic, right? And when we work with the dynamic feminine's energy is much more potent. In a sense, it's a little bit more what we might consider masculine in this because it's active, right? It's got an active principle to it. It's got kind of a trickster quality. It is instead of she who holds like the great mother or the great round, right, who can receive and hold, the dynamic feminine is she who receives and then acts upon what she is getting. It's a very creative principle. So we're in the midst of, with Venus as an evolutionary planet, a very creative time. Nothing is really going to stay still. It's that idea of, like sand flowing through our hands. And so one of the big initiations that's happening for the entire planet right now is the idea of impermanence, right? Like that nothing that we do, like the world is moving very fast, decisions are happening very quickly, nothing really is being sustained in terms of even solutions, right? We're just like in this area or time of great mobility. Okay. And I made some notes because there's a lot I want to cover in sort of a short amount of time, because I want to talk about what we're going to be like, some of the greater mysteries that we're going to be delving into in SkyDancer, but I don't want to flesh them all the way out because that's what we actually do inside of SkyDancer. So one of the nice things is that as sky astrologers, Venus has her conjunction while she's behind the sun in Gemini. And then we also take into consideration where she is when she becomes visible, when she rises. And she's going to rise in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is a water sign and it's feminine, and water is cooling. It is quite emotional, but it also has sort of that quality of holding. And so when we work with Venus as the evening star, instead of her being of imminence and fiery, like that morning star energy, and, human and messy, she's a little bit more transcendent, right? She is a little bit more like like the Dakini, like the sky goddess, right? Instead of, like the kind of goddess of sex or love, right? Who works here on the causal plane. Venus's evening star emanation is, of the sky, right? We're on the ascent, or we're moving upwards. And the other really nice thing is that when Venus makes her descent and goes to the underworld, when she rises low on the horizon, kind of like a whisper. And so it's like the energy flows really nicely. It's not like we're jolted out of the underworld and like we have to get moving again. We've got her rising in the sign of Cancer that's got that watery emotionality, that capacity to hold a little bit. And she rises more like a whisper. So we can only kind of see her faintly low on the horizon. And so it's almost like dipping your toe back in the water. And we have that support, like I said, of Cancer. Um, you know, Working with the Venus cycle, for those people who don't know, Venus is part of the lineage of the red thread, right? And so we use the myth of Inanna. The myth of Inanna is a Venus myth, right? And so Venus Venus is the originator of that kind of Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, Magdalene line, the rose lineage. And when we work with the rose lineage, we're working with the energies of the creator, preserver, destroyer, right? And so when we're on our way down, we're in kind of that phase of deconstruction. We are looking at all of the false beliefs that we have. We're shedding ego identities. We are coming into a deep relationship with our humanity and with our bodies, right? And there's this liberatory aspect to the destroyer archetype. And so after we have fully emerged from the underworld, where we've really then become naked and bowed low before the dark sister Erishkigal in the myth of Inanna, where we're really not left with many ego attachments. It's kind of like this blank slate moment. There's this huge moment where freedom and power, true power, can come in. And the power is kind of like the kind of power that's forged in the dark, where you fully surrendered, right? You've got nothing left that's burdening you, that you're carrying on your shoulders, that you're invested in as an identity. And so then as we move into the evening star phase, we are reacquainted with the creative energy, that liberation, and then we're created with, or we're faced then again with the creative and the sustaining, preserving aspect of the Godhead. Okay, so the Godhead, and as I'll explain here, and this is what we'll learn about because we're in this Gemini cycle, is a little bit different than the energies of the goddess, right? So the goddess has this like kind of round or cyclical cycle of creation, destruction, and then preservation. And I just talked about us being in this very kind of like dynamic phase of the feminine. But when we're talking about the goddess meeting the Godhead in the sustaining or preserving function, we are talking about the sustaining and preserving of life, right? Of our sustenance, of our provision, of, like what the goddess creates through her body is then met through sacred union with the Godhead, right? Who is interested, deeply interested in our like benevolent evolution, right? Like what we care to be doing with our humanity, it's met by the Godhead in this benevolent evolution. And so I want to talk for a moment, and I'm really big on lineage here about there's a teacher, her name is Akara Sophia, and she talks a lot about Egyptian stuff. And I want for a minute to just speak to something that I heard her talk about and how it's so connected to these Gemini energies we're in. So Gemini, let's just start there. Gemini, in a sense, is the sign of dualism, right? Of binary, right? So dualism is where we divide something into two opposing or contrasting things so that we can kind of see reality through a lens of dichotomy or separation. And this is the fundamental way that the human mind kind of maps reality. It's like a programming language, like those ones and zeros. And in some sense of the word, we understand that this dualism is the home of creation, right? We create through tension and opposition. And the human mind is based on this apparatus or this binary code, or in essence, duality is the learning function for this for the collective, for the matrix, right? Like for this dimension of reality. When we incarnate, we sort of agree to learn through duality. So Gemini, we know him as like Castor and Pollux or the twins. And in astrology, he's represented by that factor, by that understanding of duality. However, in the tarot, and here, I'll help us. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to look at the tarot card, okay? Just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So the tarot card is represented by the Lover's card, right? And you'll see that there's a man and a woman. And this is where we get this esoteric kind of understanding of Venus being involved. Venus, who is the function of, like, she acts like glue. She is all about how we meet the world, how we meet each other, how we meet like anything out inside or outside of ourselves. So the principle of meeting, the principle of attunement, of course, the principle, then that brings us into this principle of love. There's this way that, like, Gemini, if it's just taken with its exoteric meaning of duality, it's kind of pointing to that our consciousness as just beings down here on Earth, you can see these two people, is limited to this binary consciousness. But as you'll see in every single this is another representation of the Lover's card, there's kind of this like sacred third in between. And so back to Akara Sophia. So she was one time telling this story. And so I want to give her credit because, I think that's important. So she was saying Adam and Eve, and often people think of the Lover's card as being Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve are in the garden, and the garden represents like spirit, this perfect, this Edenic kind of atmosphere. We could think of it like Nirvana or like Shambhala or Atlantis or Lemuria. It's this representation of perfection, right? And union, which will be important. And so in the story of Adam and Eve, they are given or they are told not to eat from the tree of good and evil, right? They could eat anything else, they could do anything else in the garden, but eat from the tree of good and evil. And they eat from the tree of good and evil. And this represents what? The fall, right? And so when we think about what the tree of good and evil is, the tree of good and evil is good and evil are binary. So they had this fall into like this human condition of separation, of dichotomy, of binary. And they're immediately filled with shame. If you're somebody who has studied the Bible, like they immediately want to cover themselves, they notice their nakedness. And shame, of course, is a mechanism of a negative sense of self or a negative self cognition. It's also, like Gemini, this place where we meet self as other. If you've ever done parts work, you understand that like there's all these different parts of us, like the self in a way is sort of unintegrated, or there's many selves inside of us. And of course, then we meet other people, and other people act as mirrors for us, which is something that Venus rules. That function of mirroring and that idea of projection, those are all kind of Libran qualities of Venus. So essentially, Adam and Eve become self-aware, aware of themselves, not only as kind of separate selves, but they become aware of themselves as separate from God. There's this introduction of laboring or having to suffer and toil for survival, right? Which is another thing that makes us separate from God. And so our evening star journey in Gemini is kind of this exploration of the alleviation of this sense of separateness. It's this entrance into a non-dual realm, but I wouldn't call it a non-dual realm that is kind of bypassy. We've got these kind of two tracks inside of spirituality right now. One is non-dual, and it's almost like in the non-dual realm, everything is so relative that, you know, we can't even judge, we can't even discern for ourselves. And then in the other track, it's kind of like, you know, we're all about embodiment and reality and realism, right? And so you can see and hear again that there is this binary even inside of the different schools of spirituality that exist outside of kind of our dogmatic spirituality. But what we want to do is kind of marry the body and what we have worked through on the descent journey and inside of underworld to the sky goddess, right? To We talked about at one point in the beginning of the morning star journey, and of course we'll revisit this idea because we're working with the energies of Gemini. We so often say something like polar opposites, right? And in astrology and as a skill of the feminine, we work with this thing called weaving. Like, how do we weave disparate threads of reality together to create a new world? This is something that Isis did. She was one of her many names. She was a magician and she had the capacity to weave worlds into existence. And she did that by um, taking these binary or disparate threads and weaving them together. And so I like to look at what looks like opposites, right? Like the sign Virgo is opposite the sign Pisces in the astrology chart. And a lot of people think oppositions are a bad thing, but really what oppositions hold is the tension of possibility of what can be birthed. And if you look at how the two energies can weave together, Virgo being very, very precise and Pisces being very diffuse, and like how we can uh, dip into the land of imagination and the dream world and the infinite all, or what we might think of as the liminal realm, and kind of like, you know, Virgo with its skill of being very precise, grab one specific thread. And then as weavers, Virgo having the capacity to know exactly where to weave that thread into the tapestry that she is creating, right? And so all of a sudden, we've taken this idea of an opposition, we've made it sacred, we've brought it into union, and it's like a polar complement in a sense. And so what we want to do is really work with how do we take this energy of the lovers, this energy of Venus, right? And the way that we suffer inside of our separateness and bring consciousness and marry that to um, to spirit, right? And have the body be married to spirit, have the soma be married to spirit. And in a way, we'll learn about how even Venus, as the ruler of Taurus and Libra, there is a very similar energy happening because, you know, Venus is very imminent inside of Taurus. She's related to Soma and this incarnation. But Libra has this sort of sense of one of the archetypes of Libra is Mott, right? That like cosmic harmony and that idea of like, how do we create something that makes like this symphonic and exalted um, uh, kind of creation that's elevated into the realm of the high heart, right? And it can be presented to humanity that way. And so we often say that Taurus rules the morning star kind of apparatus of the Venus cycle, and that Libra rules the evening star apparatus. And so this is just a taster of some of the work that we'll be doing inside of SkyDancer. We also want to work with, because we want to work with this union between, not just it's like, I mean, the body, the cells, the DNA, our cosmic body as women. As women, we are a cosmic portal, period, a cosmic portal of creation, right? And so we worked a lot with us on the level of humanity, and the real like acceptance and permission for our humanity, and the ability to meet ourselves as we are, rather than through the lens of perfection, or purity, or punishment, or all of the different kind of false beliefs that we have about ourselves. But now we want to marry that kind of consciousness of acceptance to God, and really have that land in the body, really have the idea that we as women are cosmic portals, land deeply in the body, and to start to alleviate kind of the suffering of separation consciousness. And I know people talk about this a lot, but there are so many beautiful examples that the astrology is going to weave through for us, and that Venus, as I've kind of mapped out what her evening star journey is going to be, how that is really, she has just this gorgeous itinerary for us. And one of the things that we want to look very deeply at, because I noticed it, of course, in myself, and then I noticed it in some of the other participants of our last course. And I think it is just kind of part of this state of separation here, the state of being separated from the sacred third, or from spirit. Um, is that we as women really have injury to our intuition and our instinct and our gnosis. Like, we've been taught over time not to trust it. We've been taught to betray our deep inner knowing in favor of logic and reason. We're taught that in school. We are taught that. I mean, even as I've watched it with my children, who, most children are animists, right? They believe the world is alive, and they have this like connection to everything. They even believe their toys are alive, and then they're kind of told, well, that's stupid, or that's childish, or whatever. And one of my favorite passages in the Bible is that Jesus talks about, blessed is he who is like a child, right? And that being childlike is important. And so bringing this kind of magic back online is really an integral part of our evening star journey. Mercury is the ruler, right, of magic. He has a trickster energy to him. He's also the messenger, or he's like a psychopath. He can travel between worlds. And so we'll use Mercury as this kind of mediator between when we get kind of stuck in the small self and stuck inside of our humanity, to be able to help us receive and repair the connection between our kind of where the injury lies in us, and our intuition, our gnosis, and our instinct. And so this will in turn help us really become competent in weaving worlds into existence, as we begin to really see that everything, in a sense, really is interconnected. And when we see that, we realize that when we're pulling on one thread, we've got the ability to influence other threads. And so I've got so many incredible practices ready to go for us, just to help us kind of shift our mindset from the collective mundane mindset, even the mindset that we've been in as we've been in this descent into our humanity, into like this more expansive liberation, creation, sustainer energy, which we'll be talking much more about in the journey. And so I wanted to share just this tidbit. There'll be other tidbits that I come on and share about, but we'll begin with this one. If anybody has any questions about this, you guys let me know. All right. It was so good to drop in with you all, and I will continue to do so over the next few days or weeks, to really talk about all of the things that SkyDancer has to offer us, in terms of an experiential education, the ability to really become connected to Venus in a deep way. You know, Venus, if you're somebody who believes that you are part of the red lineage or the rose lineage, like we kind of know. And I know everyone who steps over the threshold into SkyDancer, I feel it, they all have medicine. Whether or not, you're in a place where you feel like you can expand enough to really accept that, maybe that feels scary to you right now, maybe it doesn't. This connection with Venus and this ability to be able to travel with her, to track her movements, to be guided by her, something incredible happens. She has a unique, I'm telling you, it's unique to each and every one of us, spiritual kind of education for us. And so everyone's journey ends up being just kind of a little bit different. It's not like I'm teaching a curriculum and then everybody's working on the same thing. We lay out what Venus's kind of ask for us is, where she wants us to put our attention. And then each that flowers or blossoms in each woman's life in a different way, and so their own medicine starts to come out, their own gifts, their own priestessship starts to come forward as they begin to travel with Venus. So blessings to you all, and we will touch in the next few days. Thanks so much.